Hello and welcome to another one of our videos on the prison system and our prison talk series. We're so thankful to have Aparna. Oh, I'm gonna mess it up. I'm just gonna have you pronounce it for me.
Polavarapu.
Polavarapu. Thank you. Thank you so much. I apologize for that. We're so thankful to have her with us. She is a tenured professor at the University of South Carolina School of Law, and she is also the founder of the South Carolina Restorative Justice Initiative. And so we've been talking a lot about different kinds of justice and retributive justice and restorative justice. So we're excited to learn from her this morning or whenever you're tuning in to watch. So Aparna, could you explain to me or explain to us what your background with the criminal justice system is and the prison system in particular? We'll start there.
Yeah, I come from a human rights background. So you'll find that people who are, at least from the legal side, who are coming to restorative justice, you'll meet a lot of them that come from the criminal, from a criminal law background, but that's actually not me. I come to this space from human rights. And I come to this space from a place of having worked on and thinking about issues of gender-based violence. And by violence, I mean like physical, economic, right, all types of violence. And trying to find solutions for that, thinking through ways that we can address that kinds of violence. And historically, especially in the internet, well, in the domestic and international space, most of us were trained to look to the state to try to end that violence, right? So we'll find a state solution, and oftentimes, especially when we're talking about like physical violence, use criminalization, right? Use the courts. And, the more I always knew that the criminal system caused harm, that the state caused harm through that system. So that was something that was always on my mind. But also working abroad and seeing other options being used more regularly, I realized that we didn't, we didn't have to recommend this system, even though we knew everything that was wrong with it, and the ways that it was imperfect. Acknowledging the harms that the punitive system, the retributive system, commits against people, I eventually came to a place where I could say, came to a place where I thought, okay, well, maybe we really should be elevating these other approaches to justice and thinking about other approaches to justice. They're not perfect either, but I saw in them a greater potential to actually be responsive to the needs of society. Kind of deviated from your original question.
Oh, that's okay. So is that what led to the South Carolina Restorative Justice Initiative?
A little bit, yeah. So I started, I have because of my background in human rights and working abroad, I have a lot of experience thinking about informal systems of justice, non-state systems of justice, other approaches to justice, right? And a lot of my work has always been, how do they work together with the state? And more recently, I started thinking about the use of, I was doing work in Uganda, and I started thinking about the use of a mechanism they call reconciliation, which has a lot of restorative elements. And so in my mind, it's really in the restorative bucket, to address problems of domestic violence, actually to address all sorts of legal problems, but I was looking at it with respect to domestic violence. And at the same time, I had been in South Carolina for enough years now that I was thinking, I think that there's some space for me to add value by bringing my expertise from working abroad here to like my own communities. And I started speaking with people in South Carolina about the use of restorative justice. Was there interest? Was it being used? And what I really gathered from a lot of people, and I have to be clear here, I was specifically talking to, I was not looking at schools or juvenile spaces, because I think people are happy to embrace it there. But then, as soon as people turn 18, decide that you don't get that freedom to rehabilitate and grow and change anymore. So I spoke with organizations and advocates in South Carolina, and what I received, right, was a significant expression of interest in restorative justice, but also I saw that there was a desire for education about it, for support as people tried to implement it, because people felt like we have the interest, we want to know more, but we don't have enough to do more. So that's how I got to founding the initiative. Was I thought, okay, well, I can fill this space. I never really foresaw myself doing this. You know, I thought I would just continue to be an academic, but I saw this need, and I could not ignore it.
Thank you. And that just was founded last year, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So it's very, very new. So what kinds of organizations and people are you educating?
All sorts, actually. So I have done some work with SCADVASA, the South Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, to conduct some webinars for their member organizations, and really anyone else on their mailing list, I guess, who signs up, just about restorative options in cases of partner violence and sexual assault, you know, how it works, what's out there, what they might look to for examples. I launched a webinar series last year when I launched the organization, which was just kind of like a fundamentals 101 level series. And it was eight webinars, some of which are on my YouTube page, not all, but some. And these 8 webinars were really designed to just like do a more extensive discussion of restorative justice. It starts out with the real basics, right? And then we hear from practitioners in various spaces who've been working in the space for quite some time about their own practice, to get people to understand all of the different ways it can be implemented, the different types of harms that can be used to address, and just feel more comfortable. Because up until that point, everyone I had spoken with had said, yeah, I've done a 1-hour webinar and I feel like I know a little bit, but I don't know, I need to know a lot more. And I was like, that's right. So I launched that, and the audience for that was really diverse. So I had, again, people who serve survivors of partner violence or sexual assault, sexual harm. I had people in the school communities, educators. There were a few judges in attendance, a few solicitors and public defenders as well, all of whom are now trying to think through alternatives.
That's great.
Yeah, all sorts of people. Like, we had a really wide range of interests. There were people who were working on anti-racist initiatives who were in attendance, and then a couple of students and just some community members.
Wonderful. Yeah. We'll definitely look into those YouTube videos to learn more. You mentioned reconciliation from your work abroad, and that is in the church. We have a book of confessions, and one of our book of or a couple of our book of confessions really focus on reconciliation. So do you believe that reconciliation, as far as they're using it, and I'm sorry, where did you say that you were working? Uganda, is similar to restorative justice here in the States? Or maybe doesn't go quite as far as reconciliation?
So to answer the first part of that, restorative justice here in the States really draws from other practices. So, you know, for a lot of the founding members, for current people joining the movement, the inspiration comes from Indigenous practices in the Americas and like global practices as well, right? So it wasn't just invented by people here. So I do think that there's absolutely some inspiration from, you know, depending on who you're talking to. For me, I was very inspired by practices I've seen, including reconciliation in other countries. I call it restorative because it has a lot of the elements that we are labeling restorative today, right? So I should give a caveat. So reconciliation is not practiced uniformly in Uganda. It's provided for in certain laws, and the laws basically say that the courts will promote reconciliation. So there are some people who treat it just like mediation, and I don't think that that's really giving, that's really allowing the process to be as robust and helpful as it can be. But the people I did work with and observe who facilitated reconciliation really took a more traditional and restorative approach to it. So the idea was to bring together the parties, the people who were affected by the harm, right? The people who were committing it, the people who were affected by it. And then also, to the extent that it was desired, they could bring community members, right? The leaders of the community, family heads, family members, the people that these two, usually it was two individuals, but sometimes more, wanted with them, and who wanted them to participate in the discussion. And then they engaged in what is essentially conferencing, right? So where there was space to talk about what was done, right? Like to really engage in, to enter into the narrative about what was done, the impacts of that. They really delved into why it happened, right? What could be done to stop it from happening. And I was surprised in some of the places where I was when I talked to facilitators and people who participated, when I was talking to women who were asking for reconciliation because of the harms they had experienced. Some of those were harms that were being reinforced by harmful community norms. So I was like, why are you asking community members to come? And some of them had said, well, it's important for us to have them there because it's important for us that they see my partner make these agreements. I feel that my partner is more likely to comply with those agreements if they're there, but also because I want them to participate in the discussion, see how this is harming me and how they're undermining other community norms, right, by doing what they're doing. And of course, not everybody wanted them there, and they weren't there if the women weren't comfortable. But in that long discussion, right, there was real exploration of what had been done. And there was some discussion of the law and the norms of equality that are supposed to like underlie any outcome, right, that any community in the country gets to. And to achieve accountability, right? And this is, I think, what's so important and what's key in separating restorative justice from just like a mediation or just a conversation, right? Is that, and one group that I spoke to in Uganda wanted to make that very clear, and they used to call them disciplinary committees or disciplinary meetings, right? Instead of just reconciliation, because they wanted people to understand they had to take responsibility for their wrongs and hold themselves accountable. And that meant at the end coming to an agreement that didn't just, wasn't just like settling like you would in mediation, but what are you going to do next, right? We agree that what's happened is wrong, and here are the steps we're going to take for the future. And all of those are elements that that we see in the modern restorative justice movement in the United States.
Wonderful, thank you. And that's such a different approach than you've committed a crime, you're going to be locked up in prison, we're going to keep you there and not give you the tools or resources when you get out to not end up back here. And that has nothing to, retributive justice doesn't seem, from my understanding, to have anything to do with a victim reconciling with whoever committed the crime.
Yeah, that's right. Retributive justice really does tend to focus just on punishment, right? So how do we punish you for what you've done wrong? And I think we've gotten to the point where we confuse punishment with accountability. It's not the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. We don't really help people.
Either participant.
Yeah.
Whether it's the person that has committed the crime or it's the person that was hurt by that crime. Neither really grow or
That's right. I mean, no one's getting the support they need, right? So
Right.
you have people who, depending on what we're talking about, they may have suffered significant trauma, but the system doesn't care about the trauma, right? And the people who have, who are being punished maybe lightly with a fine or more heavily with imprisonment are not given any of the tools that they need, right? In fact, we just disabled them further. We hurt them more from when they leave the system, right?
Mm.
It's harder to re-enter because we just don't really give support. And to the extent support is there, it's often from outside sources who have convinced the state to let them provide that support, right? Or to like allow them to go into the prison and do education or something. I think that's absolutely right. And one thing I do want to say about reconciliation, because I think when I first heard the term, I was put off by it. And I'm sure that a lot of people are, because I thought, well, you're going to force them to reconcile, right? I thought it seemed like you would, based on the plain meaning of the word or how I always understood the word, that you would force people back into situations that were harmful. But that's not really what it is. It's about coming to a place where you can come to terms with it. And, at least in the case of domestic violence, which is what I was looking at, a completely plausible outcome was that the relationship ended, right? That we've figured out what we need to go forward. And one of those things is that we end the relationship, right? So it is very, it is very careful, I think, if you're doing it the right way, to make sure that you're not just thrusting someone back into a harmful situation. And you're allowing them to leave. They get to decide. You don't tell them what to do, right?
Right. Yeah. Wonderful. I'm going to put a Presbyterian plug. So one of the our confessions is the Belhar Confession, which was written in response to apartheid in South Africa, and it's all about reconciliation. And a professor, one of my seminary professors, helped write it and helped in those conversations and the discussions. And so I hope that we as a church will maybe dig deeper into the Belhar and some of our other confessions to see how this is a biblical imperative, not just something that maybe sounds good on the surface, and that it's hard work, as you mentioned. It requires accountability, which is more than even just punishment. There's a responsibility that's put on the person, which hopefully will be better for all of us in our society if people are being able to have accountability and hopefully change, and not go back to repeating whatever has happened previously.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's really important to have structures that support accountability, right? People need support in order to be able to really fully hold themselves accountable. They can't, you can't just toss them in prison or throw them to the side and say, well, I hope you get there on your own, right? It takes some work. And we as a community have an obligation there too, to help get them there.
So what do you see the role of faith communities when it comes to restorative justice efforts? How can we as a faith community be effective participants in bringing about restorative change in our system, or what might that look like, do you think?
I think faith communities can be involved in a number of ways. One, even just by vocally showing support for it, because in order to really have more restorative justice options, we're going to need political support, right? And we're going to need people to understand that the answer can't just be like longer sentences, more criminalization, that we need to start thinking about how to support people after they've committed a harm, but also before. Like what's putting people in these positions? Right? How do we actually help people? What kind of support do they need to actually re-enter society? I think, we do see faith communities that are trying to do work in that area, especially reentry. I mean, I see a lot doing reentry work, right? So how can we give you what you need to better enter society? But even in terms of like more directly with restorative justice, I've seen some groups actually just get involved from the very beginning, either by trying to train some, like create a space in their own community to offer that, right? Or create partnerships with certain organizations so that at least one or two members of their own community can be trained and maybe work with someone who does provide restorative justice options, because I do think you'll see people who are more comfortable maybe speaking with somebody depending on what's been done. And I'm thinking especially in cases of hate, right? Sometimes they want to speak to somebody who's from their own faith community because there is a connection there, or have that person be facilitating a restorative justice conference, or even be available as a support person. So learning more about restorative justice, finding ways to more vocally support it, to create sort of the legislative change we need and the policy change we need, but also maybe getting more involved with restorative justice practices as they're developing and being implemented, to see if you can be available as support people, as I don't know, members of circles, if we're talking about circles, as even as people who can just share the information, right, to anyone who comes to you and says, I have this problem. So I think there are a number of ways it can be done. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to educate me and educate all of us. And it was a pleasure to speak with you, and we'll hope to continue to learn from you more through your YouTube videos. If you're doing another webinar, how would we find out about that?
The best way is to probably follow on social media.
Okay.
So if you go to the website, you'll see on the top right corner little icons that'll get you to all of our social media. I think we're most regular on Twitter. So you can go to the website at scrji.org.
Okay.
And that's where you can find pretty much everything. And that's usually where we'll post things if we're doing more webinars or trainings. We'll tweet about it if it's more open. And my goal, actually, after having done that educational bit, is I'm now working on helping people think through what kind of restorative practices they might have space for in their own organizations, because a few people have come up to me and said, we're interested. So what can we do? Who can, they already have a base that they serve, so they're not really concerned about that. But how can we provide a restorative option for them? Right? So we're working through developing that and getting some trainings going for some of their people.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I know you have another meeting coming up soon. So we're very appreciative of your time.
Thank you. Anytime.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.